Hey, Men of Iron podcast community, this is Garrett Barbush, and I am excited to reintroduce the Men of Iron podcast to each of you. And we want to share some exciting news in regards to this podcast and the future of Men of Iron. In 2020, our team decided to take a little hiatus from the podcast. And in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, our team worked hard to adding tools and training and resources to helping individual men grow in their faith, their family, their friends, their fitness, their finances. And we completed our Strong 27 mentorship package, and we produced a retreat curriculum called Equilibrium, and we took over the reins of Anchored Man, a 5-part video series designed for small groups of men. And on top of all that, we launched several digital challenges throughout the year to help men grow in their 5 F's. And we even built a brand new platform called Men of Iron Plus, a library of digital resources for you and the men in your life. Now, it was an incredible year, but we knew that something had to give in the midst of so much development. And so the podcast, unfortunately, took a back seat. And to be honest, we felt like we could do it better. However, we needed time to plan and execute an excellent product and service. And so the best thing for us to do during that time was to kind of bring things to a halt and to recircle the wagons. And as we did that, our team came to the conclusion that we needed someone fully dedicated to the podcast, someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could give their time, their energy, and their full commitment to delivering an excellent podcast on a consistent basis. And that's when we came across Chad Zueck. Chad is the founder of A New Kind of Man, and he believes every man has the potential to become a good man, and that every man has taken a unique path to get him to where he is today. And as we got to know Chad, we liked him. We liked his ideas. We liked the fact that he was direct and to the point. And guess what? Chad liked us, and he liked how Men of Iron was a team of guys committed to being part of God's plans to change a culture one man at a time. And one thing led to the next, and now Chad is officially part of our digital strategy team. So, here's the plan. You're going to be hearing Chad's voice on this podcast, and he'll be dropping a new podcast every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Sometimes that podcast will just be Chad. Most times it will be Chad and a guest, and you may occasionally hear me and Chad together. And we want to welcome Chad to the team, and we also want to take this opportunity to welcome Chad's community of listeners from his New Kind of Man podcast. We want to welcome you guys to the Men of Iron community, and we're excited to welcome each of you, and we want to encourage everyone to go to menofiron.org, scroll to the very bottom of that homepage, and subscribe. We're going to drop you guys a note each Monday morning with a note of encouragement. We're going to give you a heads up about each week's podcast. So welcome back to the Men of Iron podcast with Chad Zueck. This Men of Iron podcast is made possible because of sponsors like Backgate Prayers. Backgate Prayers is a company that created a tool to encourage you to pray for the ones you love. Guys, Mother's Day is coming up, and this prayer tool would make an awesome gift for your wife or your mother. This unique tool helps you pray scripturally based prayers for your marriage, your kids, your loved ones. Topics include salvation, protection, joy, spiritual growth, and more. Each set of prayer cards sits in a handmade wooden block, and it's personalized with names and favorite pictures of the ones that you are praying for. So guys, if you are looking for a meaningful Mother's Day gift for your wife or your mom, definitely check them out at backgateprayers.com. You can use the code Men of Iron for a 10% discount. And the last day to order to guarantee delivery by Mother's Day is April 27th. Thank you to backgateprayers.com. Welcome to the Men of Iron podcast, equipping men for growth in your faith, family, friends, fitness, and finances. Check out menofiron.org to learn more about how you can get involved in or support the vision of changing a culture one man at a time. Thanks for listening. Here's your host, Chad Zueck.
Well, today we have the privilege of bringing on someone who has been a mentor of mine, although we have only met face-to-face actually one time in Florida. But this is John Eldredge, is who I'm speaking of, and I have been shaped by his work and by his ministry. So I just want to give you a warm welcome, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Great to get a chance to talk to you today.
Yep, the honor is all mine. So we're eventually going to talk about your new book, which I have found to be really, really helpful. And one of the things that I loved about Get Your Life Back is just how connected it is really with some things that I've been learning. I have personally, and the guys that I'm around, have read some of Foster's work and Pete Scazzero's work, uh, and also Dallas Willard's work. And I was just waiting for you to write this book to men to help us and to bring in some of the elements of nature and drinking and beauty like you talk about in the book. But before we get into all that, I just wanted to kind of tease it up with this statement that I found on page 161 of your book. And this is what you wrote. The search this book is dedicated to is for more of God in our lives as a growing operational reality. There are few critical things to believe in order to make this search go well. First off, we must be confident that God wants to give us more of himself. Amen to that. More of himself. So when we get into the book, just know that this is ultimately all the practices that John talks about in this book are to get more of God himself. They're not just some ethereal practices. They are rooted in good scriptural and spiritual belief of being able to connect with God. Well, John, I know that you have written many, many books. I don't even know how many books that you have written. I know that I'm sitting next to me rather, is several of those. And of course, you wrote Wild at Heart, and that was the one that really just set my heart on fire for healing and pointing out wounds. So I just want to say thank you for just from thousands of miles away, what has transpired in my life through your work.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just so filled with joy to know that, Chad. That's awesome.
And I know you've written a bunch of other books too, and all of that, but I was just kind of curious and just kind of thinking about this and just to pique my interest. And but I was just wondering, what does the writing process look like for you?
I think I got cured of some things as a young man in ministry. I worked in the local church in my 20s, and then I worked for a really big Christian organization. And I saw a lot. I saw a lot of at least American evangelicalism. And one of the things that I really took away from those years was don't talk about anything you haven't lived yourself. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got a theory. Everybody's got an idea. Everybody kind of wants the new and the wow and the latest. But if you haven't lived it, you really don't have the spiritual integrity or authority to talk about it. And so all of my books come out of what God's teaching me. All of them come out of like Wild at Heart. That was a personal journey. I needed that. I needed that book personally. And so I went and chased it and then found that it was real and shared it. So it's been like that, whether it was, learning to hear the voice of God with walking with God, like do that for several years and then talk about it, or, and then with Get Your Life Back, it's very much like that too. I actually didn't intend to write this book. This wasn't like the next one on the list. I needed it. I just got fried in the world out there and spun up, and I was doing what everybody's doing, which is trying to keep up, more and more, faster and faster. So my actual process looks like this. There's 3 stages. I'll keep a journal for a while, just a writing journal with me, kind of carry it around with me, and I'll steal quotes and songs and things that just strike me. Somebody will say something and I'll go, oh, that's really good. And I'll, write it down. And so I remember it, and I take a lot of notes, listen to God, I notice the movements of my own soul. That's where most of it takes place. Because George MacDonald said there's not anything that takes place in the human heart that isn't in some way universal to every human heart. And so whether that's joy or sorrow or struggle or anything. So Second phase, I'll actually begin to lay a book out, and I've got a big, well, you can see this cork board behind me that you get to see, my office. I'll just start tacking things up all over it, right? And just how do these ideas, I'm looking for structure. I'm looking for, kind of like an artist would, like, what's the flow here? What's the landscape? How's this go? And so phase two, I'll kind of look at how does this flow? And then phase three, I'll start writing. And I don't even start, I don't chart with, chapter 1, page 1. Like, I'll write with what I'm passionate about that day. And so I might start with chapter 4 and just go, this is where I'm at right now. This is what, and kind of build the book like that. So that's kind of how it goes.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting approach. I could see, I can see that, from a reader's perspective, when I've read your books, that there's authenticity there. And I don't know how it is to be an author, the pressure from the publisher to, hey, this is the next book and this is a 3-book deal. I don't know. I don't really care about all of the ins and outs of that. None of that translates, in my opinion, none of that translates from your work. So
good. It's,
and especially this book, the word that comes to mind with this book when I was reading it is urgency. And it's, I could just sense an urgency, the way that you wrote, and probably because the topic is, it addresses my life, but also just where we are in this cultural moment. So
yeah. The crazy thing is, Chad, like, I wrote this book before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And life was hard, and then this hit, right? And now people are super hard pressed. Like, and it's just good to just name that right now. Like, this is a super stressful moment for the human soul. Like, people weren't meant to be locked up. People weren't meant to not be able to touch each other. People weren't meant to be disconnected. We've lost our normal, and people find a normal because it's what helps your soul be well, right? So, whether your normal was getting together with your buds on Thursday nights, or your normal included church on Sundays, or how all that, you find a normal, and all that's been taken away. And I think the practices in this book are, Jesus knew what was coming, right? He knew what was coming, and he prepared this and a lot of other good things, I think, to help folks through it.
What I found comforting is, going from wild at heart, and Fathered by God was very instrumental in my story and other people's stories that I've interacted with. It just really spoke a language of the masculine heart. And now I get into and read this book, and I'm thinking, okay, so John's real too. He's a dude like the rest of us. He's trying to figure it out in this walk with God in a tumultuous world. It's just with everything going on. So ultimately, you'd pointed to the reason why you wrote the book is because of what was happening in you. But speak more about that.
Yeah. Well, here was the wake-up call. Like, I'd seen a bunch of signs, but Stace and I raised 3 boys. They're young men now. They're starting their families. So we've got little tiny ones, little grandchildren. And Chad, I noticed that I couldn't play with them for more than like 5 minutes before I wanted to check my phone. And I wanted to check my email, and I wanted to look at the news, and this is before the pandemic. Okay. And I'm like, wow, John, you are really jacked up that you can't play with your grandkids because you're so plugged in. And I'm one of those guys, I love to get stuff done. I'm a hill taker. I'm a charger. I love to conquer and win and go, and, and I just got addicted to the pace of it, the insane pace of life. And then I just started noticing these symptoms, like, wasn't riding my mountain bike anymore. What's with that? And wasn't reading. Actually, I love to read. And wasn't, I could start books, but I couldn't finish them. And there was just this distraction that had gotten into my head and into my soul. And then I was just cooked. I'd get home at the end of the day, so fried,
Hmm.
just empty, tired, exhausted, but also kind of like cooked by the day. Oh, just cooked. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Um, so I set out to change it.
Is this something that Stacy could also see in you?
Totally, totally. And was happening to her too,
Mm.
because she's an author. We run a ministry together. She's going hard. Um, in fact, she was going so hard last year. She took a sabbatical because she was just exhausted. You know, women's ministry, as you know, in the church. I mean,
Yeah.
it's exhausting, and there's a lot more demand to it. And I say this with all love and respect, but women, frankly, are more complicated.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, she also is experiencing the craziness of just living in a world that's always on go.
Yeah.
It's always on go. Everybody's always on go.
Yeah, and I think that that's true to form. I mean, when it comes to ladies ministry, there is, with them, they can't disconnect as easily. For a guy, if a guy has a guy's event or something like that, he can just compartmentalize and, hey, I'm moving on. And with
Yep.
ladies, and I think it's a great benefit of the feminine soul is that connectivity. And I think that
Yep.
there's a part of that we need more of. And but yet it does get us in trouble. We can compartmentalize and then shut everyone out, and they can be so interconnected that they don't have time and space for themselves. They're too busy taking on the burdens of other ladies. So I definitely understand that. Well, in the day and age that we live in, we live in social media. It's just a social media driven world, and there's no way that we can escape that, especially now with all of the stuff that's happening with the pandemic, and now it's just driving people even more so into their phones. So before even all of this, because I don't want to get too into the weeds about what this pandemic could do, because I think the practices of get your life back will help us if we would simply do them. Even right now, I think it'd be very beneficial. But speaking of social media, what other things have you seen that whatever other effects has social media had on the human soul?
Well, so I've been a therapist for 30 years, and looking at the research, there's a direct correlation between your use of social media and the rising rates in America of anxiety and depression,
Hmm.
like a direct correlation. Tons of research on this now. Direct correlation to envy, rising envy in the culture and in people's souls. So it's actually pretty brutal. And I believe in it, by the way. I'm not a Luddite. I don't think everybody ought to just go live in the woods. Right now, people are being saved by the chance to just see somebody else's face online,
Yes.
right? And say hello and connect and share a picture of your dog and
Right.
a funny video or something. That's all
Mm-hmm.
good. That's all good. But here's the thing. So let me try and give like a big picture thing, because this is what really helped me. The war has always been for our attention. The war is for what grabs your attention. And I was talking about being super distracted, because the internet and the way that we consume information with our smartphones is literally rewiring our brains. The brain science is fascinating. The brain is a super malleable thing. They used to think it was like set in childhood, but your brain is very malleable, and it can be rewired. And so the last 20 years has basically taught everyone not to have an attention span. Like, we go
Yeah.
quick, and it's the swipe, the like, the scroll, the feed, boom, 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 the text, the emoji, right?
Mm.
So this is what was happening to me. And I love my attention. Like, I love focus. I love clarity. I love like digging into things. And I got Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, What the Internet's Doing to Our Brains. And he describes my personal experience of like, wait a second, I used to be a very thoughtful person. And
Wow.
now I'm a really distracted guy. And so here's the big picture. The big picture is the war for our attention. And Psalm 1 is that gorgeous picture of people who are so planted in God. They're evergreen. They describe their trees whose leaves never wither. And I just love that. They're like, wow, these people are so rooted. And then it contrasts them with people who are like chaff. They're just so shallow and lightweight. You know, just the next thing blows them away. And the whole thing is about your attention. The trees by the river, Psalm 1 says, they are able to give God their attention. And so, like, even in this hour, I would just say to people, like, yes, connect, yes, use Zoom, you know, but not a ton, not a ton. Like, you got to regulate it, and you got to pull out and do real things and be a real human being, not just a digital human being, because it's literally actually affecting your brain, and it's affecting your ability to give God your attention.
Wow. Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I could definitely see, even in my own life, whenever I've been operating at a really fast pace or something like that, or just operating always on go, because I tend to be the type of guy that you just characterized earlier, always on go. What's the next thing? Okay, productivity. Let's crunch this out. You know, I have a checklist. I'm like, let's get these things checked off the list. Let's get it done. And what I can verify with my own life is, man, that is such a trap, because I can be so inundated with that mentality that even in the times where I should be in my living room just engaging with my family, you know, or maybe you're watching a television show instead of a commercial. I mean, who watches commercials anymore, right? It's like you pick up your phones, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to check my email. I'm going to go through Instagram. I'm going to go look at Facebook. I'm going to look at Twitter. It's just, okay, now we're back. There was no action. Now the TV show's back. Instead of those times, I mean, whenever I was a kid, those were the times where we actually connected, even as a family, in the middle of a show and just kind of talking about it, just in normal everyday life. And that seems like a petty example, but I wanted to give that example just because I think even in that example, you see what your message, that your message is consistent.
Yeah. What you're describing is we don't know what to do with downtime anymore.
Yes.
You just watch people in lines. Everybody
Yes.
pulls their phone out. If your plane's delayed, if there's a line at the market, everybody's on their phone.
Yes.
It's like we literally don't know what to do with just chill time anymore. And chill is actually really important to the human soul. You know, the Hebrew word for Sabbath is Shabbat, and the word, it actually means to stop. Just stop. Just knock it off for a while, right? Like, just stop doing anything. Just be a human being. Goof off. Downtime. Chill time. And you're describing. We can't even do that during commercial breaks. Like,
right.
You know, it's pretty messed up.
The challenge I think that we run into also is, one of the things that you point to, and I would like for you to elaborate more on, is the pause. Whether it's a 1 minute, 3 minute, or 10 minute, which your app is really, really good. But even in that, it's like we've gotten to, it's really sad. It's really an indictment on where we are as a culture, I think. Because when I downloaded the app and I have it prompts at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And so when the app goes off, how silly is it for us as a culture that pausing for 1 minute is difficult?
Right.
1 minute. It's like I literally have to buy into 1 minute where I'm not going to do anything other than just sit and breathe and observe the presence of God.
Yeah. Okay. I built the app, and when the alarm goes off, I'm irritated at it. It's like, you're going to make me stop, right? I'm going. And now I got to pause. Like,
right.
Okay, but it's so healing. It's so healing. And this is actually kind of where the story begins. So you got to live it before you write it. You got to prove it before you teach it. And so I get home at the end of the day and pull in the driveway, turn the engine off in my truck. And Jesus would say, now just sit here for a second. Like, don't get out, just sit here. And I could literally feel the stress, like leaving my body.
Wow.
I would just sit there. Sometimes I'd lay my head down on the steering wheel, and then the spontaneous prayer was so good. I would just start like, Jesus, that phone call, that meeting I just walked out of, I give that to you. I can't carry that person's trauma I just heard. Like, I can't carry that, God. And I would just start like giving it over. And I would walk into the house a different person, right? In a simple pause. And so that's where I'm like, oh, this is good. Like, I need more of this. And so the idea is build some pauses into your day, folks. Like, learn to stop and learn to let it go. Learn to just breathe and not carry everything. And it's so nourishing. It's wonderful. That's the cool thing. Most of the stuff I recommend in this book, it's almost immediate gratification. Like, this, it's not like taking vitamins and, some 2 months from now you recognize, hey, I think I'm feeling better. This stuff, it's like, holy cow, I start feeling better right away.
You talk about two words that I've never heard joined together: benevolent detachment. And talk about that. Talk about how that benevolent detachment, what that is, kind of describe that, tee that up for us, so the men that are listening will be able to heed that advice and then apply it accordingly.
Yeah, I'll tee it up with a pretty disturbing study that was done. So after 9/11, they discovered that people who watched the Twin Towers go down on television suffered the same PTSD as the people who were there.
Wow.
Like, yeah, because the human brain doesn't know how to differentiate some of this. And so you are exposed, gang, to way too much. That the human soul was never meant to know about the drama, the trauma, the heartache, the news in every single city in the world. Like, you just weren't meant, you're not wired for that. Like, only God can do that. But the problem is, because of the smartphone and because of technology, like, you are instantly aware of the earthquake in Turkey, the latest bombings in Syria, the fires in Australia. It's just boom, 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 boom. And then you throw into it two things. You throw into it the pandemic and a coming election season, and you're going to get hammered with way more information than you should know. And so what do? Well, you got to learn to let it go. And benevolent detachment is, I'm not doing it because I'm pissed. I'm not doing it because I'm checked out. It's kindness. It's benevolent. It's with a good heart. I release this. I'm not giving the world the finger. I'm benevolent, meaning something done in kindness, but detachment because this stuff just grabs you like Velcro, And so this morning, Stacy violated one of our morning rules is this: do not check your phone first thing. Like, let yourself be a human being. Make a cup of coffee, look out the window, say some prayers, like have a moment, for heaven's sakes, before you are in the matrix, right?
Yeah.
So, but she didn't. And here's what happened. Like, this is what everybody does. We get up, we look at our phone, and there was all this stuff about the pandemic and the new restrictions and she was tanked. Like, it just tanked her. And so benevolent detachment, like, guys, you actually get out of the madness. I think, Chad, what happened was this. I think caring Christians, good people, got hooked into this idea that to be a responsible human being, you know about everything.
Yeah.
So you're up to date on the president's latest thing, and you're up to date on human trafficking, and you're up to date on what the economy is going to do, right? It just
Yeah.
feels like that's what a responsible person does. And I'm here to tell you, as a therapist, that is madness. That's insanity. What? Like, who told you that? That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple times my day, I just stop and I just say, Jesus, I give everyone and everything to you. I get off a tough meeting. Jesus, I give everything and everyone to you. My kids are doing something I don't think they ought to do. Jesus, I give everyone and everything to you. Like learning an actual practice of letting it go. And I'm telling you, like, again, your body will, right away, I just feel better. I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how much I was carrying. Like, in the, for us productive people, the brain research is if you will stop and do this a couple times a day, it actually gives you an upgrade in your focus.
Wow.
You come out of it a more focused person.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And so that's not a license, guys. If you're listening, that's not a license to just go harder and harder and harder. No. The key is you pause and then you have the focus that you need, in those moments.
Yeah.
This book kind of hinted around something that I wanted us to talk about too, and it's meditation. I think that, this is my opinion, but I think that meditation, as far as evangelical Christians, I think that it's gotten a bad rap for a long time, and we've just given that over to, well, that's just New Agey, or that's just Eastern, or that's just something else. And now there's, of course, another upheaval of Stoicism, which is all about what they call meditation. And now it's like Christianity. It's like, because the people that I mentioned earlier, I think they're a big bump into this too. When you talk about Ortberg and Willard and authors like that, now they're talking about meditation. But what's your perspective on meditation, and how can Christians recover that for the glory of God?
So it's the war on your attention again. Okay. The war is for your attention. Are you able to give God your attention for more than a quick moment? All right. and I would say God and the graces he's bringing you. So just to enjoy beauty for a moment, to enjoy a worship song for a moment. Like, meditation is your ability to linger with God in anything. Okay. So Psalm 1, blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, stand in the way of sinners, sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the word of God. And on his word, he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water, yielding its fruit in season, leaf never withers, everything he does prospers. That the guy is flourishing because he is in command of his attention. And in the war for attention, I just want to say, like, world, you can't take my attention hostage anymore. I'm going to choose when I engage, and I'm going to choose to disengage. And I want to be able to just sit. I want to be able to sit on my porch and just be aware of God. That's meditation.
Well said. Well said. One of the things that you talk about in the book, and you kind of juxtapose these two ideas of relief and restoration. What are they? And we're all around it right now. So I'm like, because like the pause, benevolent detachment, meditation, it's like, what are we gaining by this? So how would you define those two terms?
Yeah. This will be really helpful for the guys listening. Just compare, like, pick something you love to do. Going for a run, shooting some hoops, what is it? Like getting out on your bike. Think about how you feel when you're done with that compared to how you feel after binge watching 3 hours of Netflix. Like, you feel like crap.
It's not that hard to imagine, really.
No, it's not. Everybody does it. Yeah,
right.
Everybody does it. So here's the deal. Relief is the quick, it's the bag of donuts, it's too much to drink, right? Relief is something that gives you an immediate comfort, but afterwards you don't feel great. Restoration is the thing that you go do that afterwards you feel so much better. And in this moment in the pandemic, so let's just, like, this is very stressful, super stressful for human beings. I can feel the stress every day of this. And yesterday I'm in Colorado. Yes, 2 days ago it was 70 and it was awesome. Yesterday it was snowing and it was 15.
Wow.
But I know that if I spent the entire day on Zoom calls and I was fried. I was just completely cooked. I knew I have got to grab the dog and I've got to go. And I went out in a blizzard and I took my walk anyway, and it was wonderful. Like, nature heals, beauty heals. Like, that is restoration versus what I wanted to do was just go, pound a couple beers and eat a ton of chocolate.
Right.
And yeah, so in this moment, everybody, just be aware what you're reaching for is probably relief. And what we need to begin to do is just set up some restoration every day. Like, where are you getting restored?
Yeah, back to that Psalm 1 reference, planted by streams of water, just the restoration.
Exactly.
And one of the, obviously, if anyone has read any of your work, and even the book that you and your bride wrote, Captivating, people would know that you're a man of the outdoors, or even just now that you went outside, you knew you needed to get outside, go for a walk in the middle of a blizzard. I don't know if I would have done that, but if I was fried like that from being on Zoom calls, maybe, right? It's like,
I'm desperate.
But, with all of that, what benefit does the outdoors play in all this? Yeah.
So we could come at it from two angles. We could go to scripture and look at Psalm 23 and say, how does God restore David's soul? And the answer is outdoors, right? Streams, meadows, nature. But you could also just go to research data. The fascinating thing, people in hospitals recover faster, need less pain medication, they're released sooner if they just have a window looking on nature. That's amazing. Nature heals. Like the human, God wired us, we're made for creation and not for the mall, and I can watch too much March Madness. I can, I do all that. But when I want to be restored, it's what nature does. 20-minute walk in the woods lowers your cortisol levels. Research shows, it's super healing for you. And I want to say, for men in particular, men are shaped by real things, like working in the shop, going down to the batting cage and just whacking some balls. Like, men are shaped by real things. And the more and more and more that our world is digitized and we're spending all this time on screens, the more you need nature, the more you need reality, the more you need to get out there, right? And like a friend of mine, this is nuts. A friend of mine lives in LA. They closed the ocean.
What?
Like, how do you close the ocean? For heaven's sakes. That's so, and I understand there's 45 million people or whatever. And so, too many people on the beaches. I get it. But that would be the one thing that would rescue everyone right now, is to go for a swim.
Yes.
Right? That would be so renewing and healing. So, technology versus the outdoors, guys. Reduce one and increase the other.
Amen. It's interesting you make that reference to California, and I'm not even going to take the bait of California doing something like that, right? It's just low-hanging fruit. It's too easy. I'm not going to do that. But, there's conversations that I reside in Georgia, and of course we have a beach also, the whole eastern shoreline, of Georgia is beach. So probably not nice, not as nice as LA, or parts of California, but nonetheless at the beach. And so I've had just kind of conversation recently. People are kind of like wondering, okay, why are the state parks open, which they are in this state? And also, they're saying the beach is open. And so they're like, why is this open when everything else is supposed to be quarantine? And, everything, it's like, it's just, is this essential? And everybody's like, I just don't get it. And what I've said to them is, I said, no, it is. I said, you're actually, if people are cooped up in their houses, stuck to a phone because of everything that we said at the onset of this conversation, and because of what the research shows that you dig into your book, we need these experiences outside. We need a trail. We need trees. We need a swamp. We need a waterway. The lakes are open. We got to get in kayaks and canoes, and people will, just breathe deeply into the outdoors because of the nourishing effect. And in the conversations that I had, it was interesting. Once I started talking about it, they were like, oh, that actually makes sense. I'm like, we're creatures. The way that God has made us is to be able to need beauty and nature and the outdoors because of our spiritual and emotional state. And so I'm hoping people will read this book and that they read it quickly, because this has so much to benefit us, even right now in the stage that we're in and just the time period in history. I mean, this is going to be written in my grandkids, your grandkids' history books of this time period. It's remarkable.
Grandpa, tell me about the pandemic.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. What was that like? Right?
Oh, wow.
Well, here's the question to your listeners. What's the story you want to tell?
Yeah.
You want to say it was horrible. I really suffered from mental collapse. I was so scared. Or do you want to say, you know what? I used it to flourish.
Yeah.
I was stuck. And so I went deep.
Yeah.
And I found God, and I prayed a lot more than I normally do. And oh man, there was this one walk I used to do, and you described the walk and the trees, and it was so healing. And ever since then, I've just made it a habit to get outside.
Yeah, that's remarkable. You are actually starting to talk about really what I wanted to be the last question of our interview. And I know you have to jump off here. You have 7 minutes, and then you got to jump to the next thing, and you may want to take a pause in between then. So you're actually speaking right into this. And I wanted the last question that I would ask you to be this, John. What would you like for your legacy to be? I'm not just talking about with your kids and grandkids, because I think I know the answer to that. But as far as, on the world stage, I mean, your books have touched millions of people. And I was just wondering, what would you like for your legacy to be?
Lots of people being able to say, I know Jesus because of him. I know Jesus, and I know Jesus and his ability to heal my soul. I know Jesus and his power to restore my humanity. Like really Jesus, not the religious, but like the man who restores my soul. That'd be good.
That's a legacy right there.
That'd be a good legacy. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to actually break my rule. I'm going to ask you one more question because we have time. So here's another question. What are some books that you're reading right now that you would recommend to the rest of the guys?
Well, okay, because we're in the pandemic, I'm going to recommend like playful stuff, light stuff that brings you joy, right? So The Horse and His Boy from the Narnia series, right? Robert Ruark's book, The Horn of the Hunter. It's an incredible story about an African safari and the wildlife and all of that. I'm reading Teddy Roosevelt's books on his ranch days. And when he had a ranch in the Badlands of the Dakotas. I'm reading fun stuff, right? I'm not reading heavy stuff right now because there's just enough heavy, right? We're all getting our heavy through the news and everything. So I'm keeping it light.
Great advice. Well, John, I want to say thank you very much for coming on the show today. You have given us a lot of insight and practical things to jump into and to really to get our life back. No pun intended on the title of the book. I believe it. I believe in the message of the book. I'm utilizing it. I'm an advocate, and I will probably be the reason why you sell several more books. So,
thank you, Chad.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, let's go help some people.
Yeah, that sounds great. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show today, John.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you.
This Men of Iron podcast is brought to you by Men of Iron. If you're interested in getting involved or supporting the vision of changing a culture one man at a time, or you simply want to know more about our Strong 27 mentorship experience, Equilibrium retreats, Anchored Man video series, or Men of Iron Plus, go to menofiron.org.